Hi, everyone, and welcome to video number 7 of Unit 4, Expansion of Regionalism and Reform from 1800 to 1848. So in this one, we're going to be getting into a little bit of society and culture as we look at both topics number 4.9, the development of American culture, and 4.10, the Second Great Awakening. So let's get into it. Okay, so what were the characteristics of this new national culture and identity that began to emerge in the early 19th century? And this is a pretty important concept for Unit 4, this idea of a national identity emerging that's really uniquely American. Okay, so some of this is going to be based on American elements, some of this is going to be based on European influences, some of it's going to really reflect the regional cultural sensibilities of different parts of the United States. But one big influence is going to be Romanticism. So prior to the 19th century, most of American architecture, artwork, literature, philosophy was very shaped by European Enlightenment. So you may actually recall this from the 18th century and from our discussion of the American Revolution, that a lot of Enlightenment ideals are going to really shape kind of American ideals. But by the early 19th century, we see the emergence of Romanticism, which is really a reaction to the very cold rationality and logic of the Enlightenment. Even religion was really approached during the Enlightenment by the deists and the Unitarians from this very kind of rational and logical standpoint. But Romanticism is going to emphasize warmth of emotion, desire, passion, and they're really going to emphasize the beauty in nature. So that's what's really going to be reflected in the art and the literature and the philosophy of this time. So starting with architecture, you can really see the shift pretty clearly here. In the colonial period into the 18th century, we see this Georgian style of architecture. It's very restrained, very symmetrical, very geometric in the style of architecture. You can see this over here on the left, these style of houses that are very kind of straightforward, simple, plain, symmetrical. But by the 19th century, we're seeing this kind of Greek and Roman revival, which features a lot of domes and arches and columns. And this is exactly what our capital is going to look like. Because you may recall, the U.S. Capitol was essentially burned to the ground during the War of 1812, including the White House and the Capitol buildings. And they're all going to be redesigned in this kind of Greek and Roman revival kind of style. Okay, so getting into literature. So Sir Walter Scott, a Scottish writer, like I said, European influences, is going to be very popular. He focused on heroic characters, classical historical settings. In the 1820s, American authors are going to begin to create these distinctly American sensibilities in literature. So, for example, James Fenimore Cooper writes The Last of the Mohicans, which was a very kind of romanticized view of both the opportunity but also the danger of the Western lands of the United States. Washington Irving is going to write Rip Van Winkle and The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, probably both of which you've probably heard of, which is sort of the American landscape cast into a world of fantasy. Also, we're going to see the development of the first kind of American dictionary by Webster. That it's an American dictionary of English language that's published in 1828 that standardizes spelling and pronunciation of American English. So we were looking at a document in class the other day, and someone was asking me about standardization of American English, and the American dictionary in 1828 is really, the Webster dictionary is going to do a lot to standardize spelling and pronunciation. Okay, so looking at art, one of the most, the biggest artistic movements of this time, again, it's a romantic movement, is the Hudson River School of Art. They use their canvases to portray these very dramatic renditions of American landscapes. The landscape was typically depicted as pristine, untouched land, okay, lands to the west, lands that are paradise-like utopias. And they usually depicted encroaching civilization as something that's coming to spoil it. So this is not an uncommon view, and actually really does also reflect the leading philosophy of the time, which was transcendentalism. So let's talk a little bit about that. So that's rooted in the romantic view of the very transcendent power and beauty of nature. Transcendentalists believed in the perfectibility of humans. They saw nature is created by God, and that was perfect. And mankind also created by God, so it would be possible to perfect man as well. So some of the really influential writers, Ralph Waldo Emerson is probably going to be the most influential or the most well-known transcendentalist writer of this time. He emphasized individualism and self-reliance. He emphasized a uniquely American spirit of nationalism and identity, saying, no, we're not European, we are American, we are self-reliant, not reliant on Europe. He also emphasized spiritual matters over more material concerns. Henry David Thoreau, also a very famous one. Henry David Thoreau did a 2-year experiment, which he lived very simply in a cabin in the woods for 2 years, just alone. He pondered the nature to kind of understand the truth about life in the universe. And after that, he wrote his probably most famous book, Walden, because as he lived next to Walden Pond. Because of Walden, he's remembered as a kind of pioneer, like early ecologist and conservationist, before that was really a thing. He was also well known for his civil disobedience. Now, he mostly tried to stay out of political affairs, but with the Mexican-American War in 1840s, he believed the war was unjust. He didn't want to pay a tax that would support it, so he refused to pay it and gets thrown into jail. One of his friends comes to visit in his jail, and he says, Thoreau, Henry, what are you doing in here? And he says to his friend, what are you doing out there? He believed that it was important to disobey when laws were unjust. And 20th century reformers like Mohandas Gandhi and Martin Luther King are going to use these similar ideas of civil disobedience. Okay, so we also are going to see this movement during this time period to create these utopian societies, kind of communal societies. Brook Farm was kind of the most famous transcendentalist ideal community. It was known for its artistic creativity, its innovative schooling, very popular with the New England elite and their children. Other communities, and there's several of them, the Shaker community in Kentucky, at its height probably had about 6,000 people. They believed in common property, but no marriage. They forbid marriage and any kind of sexual relationships. Men and women slept completely separately. And you may not surprise you to learn by the mid-19th century, they become essentially defunct because of lack of new recruits. And they also weren't having children. So, you can't grow naturally that way. And most people weren't super interested in living that way. And then another one I want to talk about is the Oneida community. Now, this was a real controversial one because their primary focus was perfect social and economic equality. Nothing less than perfection. So they believed in holding common property, but they also believed in common marriage and common parenting. So this was really pretty interesting. People thought it was sinful and like this terrible like experiment in free love. Interestingly enough, the Oneida community actually survived because they became really well known for making really fine silverware. So you may have actually heard of Oneida silverware, or if you look at, I don't know, maybe most of our silverware is made in on other countries these days. But if you look at common silverware brands today, Oneida is still a really big one. So they actually survived economically by producing silverware. And to this day, the Oneida company still produces silverware. Okay, so let's go ahead and swing into the Second Great Awakening really briefly before we finish up here. So what were the causes to the Second Great Awakening? So let's start with, you may recall, the First Great Awakening in the 18th century was the first really uniquely American cultural movement that helped to sort of unite different regions of the colonies, because this, of course, was before the Revolutionary War. Well, the Second Great Awakening in the 19th century is another series of religious revivals among Protestant Christians that really emphasize righteous living, personal restraint, moral rectitude. All of these things would lead to salvation. This spread really rapidly through America thanks to Methodists and Baptists who held camp meetings outside the formal church structure. This is very similar to the First Great Awakening in that way. They organized these meetings of preachers, and they brought in a lot of people in the 1830s, 40s, 50s who had never really been to a church or belonged to church. And they preached these sermons of very great emotion, again, also kind of similar to the First Great Awakening. Now, there's a few different causes for the Second Great Awakening. One can be the market revolution. Individuals are learning a few different things from the market revolution. First of all, that economic success was in their own hands. Theoretically, hard work and dedication could lead to greater upward social mobility. So that led them to a similar idea with spiritual salvation. But there was also sort of a fear that the market revolution, increasing industrialization, might lead to sin, especially for unsupervised young women living in factories and mills, or less supervised, or prone to the sin and greed of the factory owners. So there was also this fear that industrialization would lead to more sin, more greed. But the market revolution in some ways had a really similar message to the Second Great Awakening, in which the Second Great Awakening, they said, hey, your salvation is in your own hands. Reform your life, control your impulses and do justice in the world, and you can be saved. Now, this is actually where it's sort of different from the First Great Awakening, because you may recall in the First Great Awakening, salvation was in God's hands alone. You may recall that sort of famous Jonathan Edwards sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, where, that God is holding you like a spider over the fiery pits of hell. Well, in this case, it's not God holding you over, but your own individualistic actions in terms of gaining your own salvation. So the Second Great Awakening really emphasized democratic and individualistic beliefs. Again, that is similar to the First Great Awakening. There was this growing desire for much more political participation. So Second Great Awakening is really, really mirroring political and economic trends that are also happening at the same time in the 19th century. And guys, that's so important to understand that these are not completely separate ideas, that cultural changes, economic changes, and political changes in many ways all mirror each other. Just like there's a political desire for more participation in the lower classes, many of these camp meetings were very egalitarian. So that made them extremely popular among the lower classes. Increased participation in government coincided with this feeling that, hey, you can participate in your own salvation, again, just the way you can participate in your own economic well-being in industrialization and the market revolution. Okay, so all of this stuff really sort of stacks on top of each other with sort of very similar connected feelings. We already mentioned the idea of romanticism. This championing of emotion over rationality is going to have a big influence in the Second Great Awakening. Now, we have some of that in the First Great Awakening too, but in that intervening time, there's also the Enlightenment, which again, very cold rationality. This reaction to this is going to be evident in religion as well. Deism and Unitarianism in the 18th century, which take religion, approach it in a very rational way, is going to fall out of favor during this time period in which you see this kind of new kind of preaching that's done with great emotion. Charles Grandison Finney, for example, is a really big example of one of the preachers of this time. He sought to awaken emotion in his hearers, to make these really audience-centered sermons, to use plain, common language and metaphors to help people understand religion and salvation. And these sermons were also moral in nature. Finney's sermons also emphasized not just personal salvation, but a moral reformation of society, because an individual can be saved, okay? And this is, again, similar to what the Transcendentalists believed about individual perfectionism, like the ability to kind of perfect individuals. Well, that's going to be mirrored in this religious trend that says it's not just about, personal perfectibility and personal salvation, but also a moral reformation of society, that if individuals can be reformed, so can society. So this is really important because this is going to get us into our next video, okay, which is going to be about reform in the United States during this time period. And the Second Great Awakening is going to have a big influence on reform movements, again, because it does emphasize the ability to reform society in a moral way. So we're going to start to see increasing movements against slavery, against alcoholism, and the sale of alcohol. So we're going to see temperance movements, abolitionist movements, reform of prisons, reform of educational institutions, and we're going to talk all about that in the next video. So I'll see you then.